Spread out like this remind me of COVID a little bit. The
Is that about 6 feet?
little social distancing here.
Okay, you stay your 6 feet away, and I'll stay the same. I'm going to monopolize David's time for just a moment with some questions while you formulate your questions, specifically, how dare you steal my retirement, which I think a lot of questions are going to could come up from that. So I'm working on a project on vocation right now, and I want to ask some questions, David, about your vocation, which I think will also be appreciated by our guests here to get a little bit of an insight into your background and what you do now. So start with this question: what is your work? And I want you to explain that question to a middle schooler. And that might not even be good enough, because I one time asked a chip developer to tell me what he does at a second grade level, and I didn't understand what he meant. So simplify this thing.
That's a fair point. Some answers might require more complexity than others. But vocationally, what pays my bills is I run a wealth management firm called the Bahnsen Group. We have 60 employees, 7 offices, and there are a number of households around the country whose liquid assets total about $5 billion that have come to us and asked us to help them financially organize their affairs and match solutions to needs and challenges. So various people have various needs with their assets. Some it is estate planning, tax planning, financial planning, a portfolio of assets that will match up to various financial objectives, a stream of income, all sorts of different things. There's varying degrees of complexity and nuance, but what we do is create those solutions and implement those solutions on behalf of clients who pay us a fee to do that. And now, because capital markets are, first of all, beautiful, and second of all, complex, it takes a certain philosophy of how to navigate financial markets, and then there's a lot of different skill sets needed within the organization, various specializations needed to deliver upon that. So that's the company, and then my role within that is I'm actually managing the money. So I serve as the chief investment officer. I'm making actual decisions. We will buy this stock, we will sell this stock, and here's the reason we will do it. And I am overseeing, of course, the total day-to-day growth and management and strategy of the business. It's a good 16-hour-a-day job.
Okay. So if you...
Oh, but it pays very well, by the way, in case you were wondering. Yeah.
I would hope it would.
Yeah.
When you were young, I don't know if you dreamed about doing what you're doing now. How did you get to where you finally said, "This is what I think I want to do with my life"?
Well, I'm going to answer it very transparently, and I don't think I know many of you in the room much at all. But maybe Bill and I have only met a couple times in the last few years. But I don't think my path to it is the path I'd recommend for a lot of people. We have on our website at the Bahnsen Group a picture of me, and it's funny, just in Lansing today, I showed this picture from my phone because someone had brought it up. But if you remember the show Family Ties, that was on NBC in the 80s, and the main character was played by Michael J. Fox from Back to the Future fame, and his name was Alex P. Keaton on the show. And besides my now late father, Alex P. Keaton was my hero. And I went on Halloween when I was 10 years old, wear the sweater vest with the tie with the briefcase, and that's what I wanted to do, is be Alex P. Keaton. And I was reading economics at a very young age. I was obsessed with it. But I didn't know enough to know, as most people wouldn't, what that exactly would mean in terms. When you talk about Wall Street, it's a very nebulous term. Even today, I encounter grown adults all the time, don't really know exactly what it means. So I think I had an unsophisticated idea of it, but I did have a certain aspiration to working in finance. There was something about it that really appealed to me. But I also had a very philosophically minded father who instilled in me first principles from a very young age. And then we also were extremely close. He was my best friend, my hero, my mentor. And I got career advice from him on a daily basis throughout high school, and then getting ready to start young adult life, and he died. And so my path here was not the path I would recommend for most, because it has come about through a great deal of sweat and toil and tears. And in my early days of young adult life, by necessity. My mom was already gone, my father passed away, and I was alone in the world to go make a living. And at the age of 27, having built up a business that I ended up selling and kind of, working very, very hard to get to a point of sort of survival. At that point, I had the self-confidence as a young adult that I could try anything. If I had known that about 95% of people who enter a career in wealth management fail, I probably would not have done it. But I didn't know. And at the time, I was engaged, and I got married, and now, 25 years later, here we are. So that was a path that was really largely, the key catalyst in it was the tragedy of Dad dying and me having to go down a path of necessity. But it was not a foreign aspiration. It's something I thought about, dreamt about in a different context from a very young age. But my dad, who believed very much, he was very theologically minded, philosophically minded. He very much believed that what we really needed to apply Kuyperian thought was that mentality, philosophically, theologically, into vocational spheres. Marketplace, finance, education, technology, there's all these different silos he would have believed the same thing about. But I think there's an incredible amount of leverage available in the marketplace. That's why this is my passion. I want to see a whole lot of reform in the church. I want to see a whole lot of godly families, all of those things. But I don't talk to people much that disagree with that. Sure. Those parts we may not execute all the time very well, but people agree. Yeah. They don't agree on marketplace. And they don't realize how much kingdom leverage we have if we would become leaders in the marketplace. That's why I feel so strongly about this subject.
Yeah, you love your work.
I do love my work,
yeah.
Yes.
Do you think a person has to love their work to do well in it? Does a person have to be passionate about what they do to be successful? I'm glad that you do, and some people do, and that's wonderful. Does everybody have to?
It depends sort of what you mean by that, because I think a lot of people would say, do you think that people are supposed to love, grabbing a pastrami sandwich from the deli and bringing it to the customer at the diner? I mean, this just sounds like they're like really brutal work, getting yelled at by customers. And that makes sense. Within this visual I've pictured of this young gal in New York at 23 years old getting yelled at a diner while she's grabbing a pastrami sandwich trying to get a $2 tip. Do I think she's supposed to love that moment? Maybe not. But I will say this, while she's doing that, as she waits for her break on Broadway and one day becomes the actress and singer performer, because there's not a person on Broadway that didn't work in that diner. Not one. There is a sense in which the journey is so much more valuable than the destination. And so for me, the things I appreciate most in my career were moments of tremendous adversity and distress. So in that more global context, I think we can appreciate the bad things because we recognize that they may be leading towards a good thing. But admittedly, in both of those examples, me becoming a successful wealth advisor and a waitress at a diner in New York becoming a successful Broadway actress, there's a certain grandeur, a certain material achievement. There's a kind of social strata, that might seem to be a trophy at the end of it. And some people may feel that there's a drudgery in their work that's perpetual. They're climbing a mountain, but at the end of their mountain is not Wall Street or Broadway and all that. And I recognize it, but I first of all think to the extent that challenge is palpable, it should motivate people more and more to embrace a market economy, because there's only one thing that gives people the freedom to do what they want to do in life, and that's a market economy, where there is a high specialization, where there's a high division of labor. None of these things existed at all in human history for thousands of years. You worked on the family farm. By the time we got to the 19th century, you might have worked in a local factory, but there was no dynamism. You were not moving away. You were not able to move back. You couldn't move out or in, let alone say, okay, well, my dad is a carpenter and I want to go be something totally different. My dad was a pastor and a Christian intellectual, and I become a financier. Those things were completely unheard of until Adam Smith, until classical economics, until modern free enterprise. So the great solution to the issue of people being able to work in a place that matches their passions and skills is a market economy. That's the sine qua non that makes it possible. But do I think there are people that are in a position that they're not going to enjoy the work necessarily? I understand that challenge, but I do think that there's a reorientation that can take place to bring joy to the work. If nothing else, realizing some of the happiest people I've met are the people that clean the rooms at hotels. I travel a lot in hotels, and sometimes I see them kind of singing, and they're coming in. You have to really appreciate that you're meeting human needs. There has to be this sort of recovered understanding that what is paying you to do a job is the fact that you're serving others. And we've gotten so into this transactional view of work that it's fundraising. Yeah. I'm working so I can get paid, so I can, if I don't do real well, just pay my bills. If I do pretty well, I can become more generous, more charitable. And if I do real well, I'm working so I can stop doing it, that retirement idea. But all three of those things are utilitarian.
Because you can love your neighbor in any kind of noble enterprise.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it doesn't have to be your dream job. You can still love your neighbor.
Absolutely. And serve your neighbor. That's exactly right.
So, David, imagine that you were asked to give a commencement talk to high school seniors on work, and they gave you 3 minutes to give that talk. What are some bullet points? What are some high points that you would pass along? Maybe looking back at your own high school self, or looking at high schoolers, seniors today. How do young people become the sort of folks to do well in the kind of workplace that you think is so important for our flourishing?
I think if I only had 3 minutes, that one of the points I just made would be an important one to get through, which is this idea of the journey versus the destination, that asking people to celebrate those difficult times along the way. I think that there's a sort of false expectation that's been instilled into people. It's a byproduct of the prosperity of our day. We have a lot of margin. We have a lot of excess. We have a lot of ability to be wasteful and get away with it. But fundamentally, most people do have to struggle in the early stages of their career. I would encourage young people to recognize that struggle is a glorious thing, that it is almost inevitable. You learn from it, you grow from it, that you will deal with difficult people, which is part of what God asked us to do on this side of glory. You will be treated unfairly, which is kind of assured to us that would happen at times, and that you will achieve things, and that happiness really is a byproduct of earned success. That somebody who is given material comforts versus somebody who works for it, there's just sociologically no comparison. That people who earn that success are going to have more fulfilled and flourishing lives. And I think it's a very important lesson if I only had 3 minutes. Now, truthfully, what I'd really do, though, is just cheat and speak for like 30 minutes.
And say, has it been 30 minutes already?
Exactly.
Right. So if you, I don't know how everybody views the kind of job that you have, if people think that it's a hard job to be a Christian in or not. What would you say are some challenges for doing your job well as a believer?
Well, I think that the challenges that go with my industry and my profession in being a believer are the same in many industries. Some will say like, oh, it must have been hard because they saw the movie Wall Street in the 80s, or they saw Wolf of Wall Street 10 years ago, and they think that there's this rampant hedonism and that everybody in New York is out at the bars till 2 in the morning and doing drugs and womanizing. And I say, no, don't worry. That's not happening in Wall Street any more than it is everywhere else. These are kind of problems of the fallen world. They're not unique to finance. What is a challenge, I think, for a lot of Christians in finance is not worldly hedonistic temptations. The dirty little secret of most people in wealth management that are grown-ups is they're all a bunch of soccer dads and boring, people like me. The Wall Street movie may have been pretty romantic for some young hedonist 30 years ago, but it's not been my experience. Maybe I'm hanging out with the wrong people or the right people.
Or the right
yeah.
people.
I think that a lot of people desire a profession where they have a certain amount of control over things. And if it goes well or doesn't go well is going to be almost entirely a byproduct of your output. If I do this, then this will happen. So I'm going to make sure I do this so that this happens. There's professions that line up that way, ways to try to make the trains run on time and get paid for doing that. But yeah, in finance, you don't have that luxury. The largest variable, and this is why there's a high compensation premium in our line of work as well, but the largest variable is outside of your control. You don't control what the market will do. You don't control how people will respond to the market. And you're largely managing human behavior, which I would think pastorally you could relate to, can be very difficult. And so there's lots of blessings and enjoyments out of it as well. But that's a hard element for a Christian, I think, especially one who believes they can control things. You get humbled very quickly when you come to terms with how much happens in life of consequence that is totally outside of our control.
That's correct. So to maybe flip that question, and this will be my last question, and so get ready with your questions in just a moment. What are some, maybe you could briefly mention what your view of sort of witnessing at work or, being a Christian, being salt and light in the world as a worker, maybe what your view of that is, and then whatever your view is, how do you feel that you're able to represent Christ well or strive to represent Christ well in your work?
Yes. It's one of my favorite questions. I'm going to do this real quickly. You can consider me to be what's called a level 4 person about work, and I'm going to explain to you what that means. And I would love for all of you to join me in level 4. Level 1 is a person that says work is a necessary evil. It's not good, but you just have to do it to make a living. That's a level 1. Level 2 is a person who says, no, you can actually work and do well, and then if you do well enough, you could even help your church, help the orphanage, give to the poor. So you could, by doing well in work, not only feed yourself and your family, that necessary evil stuff, but you can become more generous in society. And level 3 is someone who would say, not only can you make a living and be able to give to the church building fund, but if you do well in work, you can witness to people. It will give you the opportunity to share the good news of Christ with them. And by being a bad worker, it's going to hurt your witness. By being a good worker, will help your witness. And then there's level 4, which is what I am, and I'm about to get to. Now, the thing about level 1, it is true by working you can make a living. By level 2, it is true by working you can tithe and be a giver. And without working, you can't do level 1 or level 2. And it is true that your witness, your faithful presence is going to be enhanced by not being lazy, not being incompetent, that the more technique and competence and skill you bring to work, it's going to help your faithful presence more. But all 3 of those things are still some form of utilitarian. There's some form of denying the intrinsic value of the work. Where level 4 says the work matters not only because you can make a living, because you can tithe and give, and because you can meet people and witness, but because making widgets, developing services, providing legal counsel, educating preschoolers, whatever the vocational calling may be, it actually matters. And I think this is one of the great challenges of the faith and work movement, is that they're stuck at level 3. They're not willing to get to the full Christian doctrine of work that sees internal meaning in the work itself. Dorothy Sayers has a wonderful quote I love that I quote in my book, where she says, so many churches are content to preach a message of don't show up at work drunk. That's a pretty important message, but they never tell the carpenter, go do good carpentry, which is an equally important message. And I think that this is where we are now. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, in the context of being a level 4 person, that doesn't mean there's not level 3, 2, and 1 along the way. And there are ample opportunities, and I definitely believe that my public Christian witness has been enhanced in my own profession. But someone who sells vacuum cleaners for a living may not have the opportunity to, they may not have the platform that I have. They're not going to be on television a few times a week and have subscribers to writings and be able to write books. So there's certain things that God's blessed me with in my life that are a byproduct of a platform that I wouldn't have otherwise. And yet I do care deeply to use the platform to be a witness for Christ. But if that meant to somebody else, that guy tells the truth. That guy talks about Jesus. He's so at managing money. That's not what I'm after. It's not what God's after. What God wants, Colossians 3:23, 1 Corinthians 10:31, what God wants is for me to be a witness to Christ in the way that I manage money, in the way I serve clients, in the way I grow my business. Those various tangential components that come off of it, witness, financial well-being, all of that type of stuff, that's supplemental. The main thing is God cares about the work himself.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And that's what people are coming to you for, asking you, this is how you can serve me, this is how you can love me, is by doing your job well. And so doing that is loving your neighbor. Well, I've got a million more questions that I could add, but to be fair, let me turn over to you. Just raise your hand, and I'll see if I could just repeat the question for those who are live streaming. Yes? Good. So the question is about balancing positive and negative aspects of specialization in today's workforce.
I think that it is a failure of our education system, not a failure of our marketplace. That I refer to specialization as a luxury in the marketplace where goods and services are being produced, and that I take for granted, as a vegan Gregorian once said, that people learn the liberal arts, that they learn how to read and write and count and other basic functions outside of their specialized silo because they're human beings. So the liberal arts, the more generalities, I assume when I talk about specialization of someone I hire into my firm, and I say I'm specifically hiring someone to do research on the utility sector, that's a pretty niche specialization, right? I take for granted that they can read and write and have a basic understanding of certain elements of the sciences, of the humanities. But the reality is that is a K through 12 job. I want people at a young age, regardless of what type of school they're in, to develop the generalities that I think are necessary to having a flourishing life. And a specialization is tapped on to that core foundation of understanding. And so I oppose vehemently the idea of someone being siloed to a point where all they know is a niche and a specific thing, and they're functionally incapable of everything else. The vision, I guess, I would try to present is one in which, off of a foundation of wide generalities across a multitude of disciplines. A specialization is tapped on, that specialization ideally being one that allows people to marry their passions to their skills.
Thank you.
I'm
Another
curious
question.
if the answer is satisfying for you or not, or if you would still have a concern. Okay.
Yes, John. So how do you instill a work ethic in someone who didn't grow up with one?
Well, for years, one of the great things that would happen is they would be poor. This is one of the downsides to what is a reasonably wealthy society, is that people can have a poor work ethic and still get by. And I think we're living in a time where there's a declining standard of living, or at least not growing standard of living for many people, oftentimes of a poor work ethic, oftentimes the people who have made poor decisions, and they're looking to blame someone. And so many on the right want to blame the government. They want to blame a trade deal with China. They want to blame big tech. There's plenty of scapegoats, and many on the left want to blame corporate greed and these other types of things. That narrative is pretty consistent. And yet in reality, I think that we definitely have to shame people into being hard workers. Now, here's the beauty of what I just said. Everybody who's themselves is successful and happy and living a pretty well put together life, they've already done it. Their problem is not practicing what they preach, it's preaching what they practice. We know that the ingredients for a successful, flourishing life are hard work, personal discipline, and so forth. If it worked for us, how selfish is it of us to not share it with others? To go to Johnny and say, Johnny, you're 26 years old, you're slacking, you're not marryable, no girls want to talk to you, you're a disaster. Get it together. That's a loving thing to say. Johnny's a real person, by the way. Like, there's a lot of Johnnies. 26, 30, 36. That's what I believe, is that you have to have tough love. And ultimately, they have to be made to face the consequences of their decision. But it is a challenge we have now, because it is not considered as socially shameful as it used to be a bad worker. People brag. It's one of the things I say all the time. I live back and forth between Manhattan in New York City and Newport Beach, California. And Newport is a very nice place to live. And people say all the time, why in the world do you like going to New York? I talk about this in the conclusion of my book. I say, you know what? I think that before I achieved the kind of financial freedom that I achieved, I looked at Newport at people who they were working to get to a point where they didn't have to work anymore, that they could just check out, and it was socially commendable to be 40 years old wearing shorts and a Rain Spooner shirt at the bar at noon. In New York, you could close the biggest deal you've ever heard of in your life on Monday, and on Thursday they want to know what you're up to next. And I think there's something commendable about that work ethic, about this idea of that you're really constantly producing, and yet working towards the point of being removed from society. That's become very commendable. It's hard to preach a work ethic to Johnny at 26 when so many 46-year-olds who have money have removed themselves from a position of work ethic. So I don't know if I'm scratching exactly the itches behind the question. There's a lot of different possibilities of where, there's different contexts that will exist of where somebody lacks work ethic. One of the most common ones in the church I need to be more sensitive to is not a person who's playing video games all day till they're 35. It's not a person taking drugs and making horrible decisions with their life. A lot of times it's someone who means well, but they're reading too much Reformed theology. Now this is one that gets people upset when I say it. I'm just making this up on the spot here, Pastor, but I stand by it. I've known a lot of people in my life that should be reading less systematic theology and working harder in their day job. I really believe that. There's room for theology. There's room for other extracurricular endeavors. But I think that there needs to be this focus on that thing we were created for. And that could be another example of where someone needs that kind of kick in the tail towards a harder work ethic. So there's a lot of different contexts out there. Finally, one thing I should have said earlier, there's absolutely nothing in the world better at making a young male adult who struggles with work ethic a hard worker than marriage. Married people work harder. Women like hardworking men. I didn't write the rules. I'm just here to tell you about them. The burden of children, providing, it gets people, it civilizes people. It orders them towards what God made them to be. I'm a big fan of family unit as part of my theology of work and vocation.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you. Another question? Yes. How would you define success in life?
I would define success, first of all, it would depend on the context in which the person was asking me the question. So you're welcome to add more color to what you mean if there's a particular category or lane you're talking about. But if you just mean simply high level, I'll come back to the way I define human flourishing. When I talk about this, when I teach economics to high schoolers at the Christian high school I started in Southern California, I believe that human flourishing is the material and spiritual peace, joy, and abundance that comes from living an obedient life. I think that God cares about our material well-being, and someone who is materially impoverished faces a lot of challenge to their flourishing, and somebody who is spiritually impoverished faces. So you can have a very, very wealthy person materially who is spiritually impoverished, and you can have a person who has great character traits, fruits of the Spirit, and faithfulness, but is living in material impoverishment, and they would be want of that flourishing component of the good life. So just as our incarnate Christ lives in both the spiritual and physical world, has a material and immaterial component to his nature, fully God yet fully man. I believe that we are made with souls that can never die, that we have an eternal destiny, and at the same time we are embodied humans. And so my definition of success has to take in both of those components of human reality.
Yes, Nick.
You want to repeat
Yeah,
it?
are there any resources you could think of to help the family, help incorporate your family in the quest of work?
Well, I do very much agree that family is very important, and I think, I have 2 or 3 kids. They mean the world to me. See, that joke always works. I have 3 kids. I know their names, their birthdays, their ages. I talk to them every day. I'm a traditionalist about a lot of these things. My answer here doesn't work in every audience I might be speaking to. But in the acknowledgement section of my book, I am very clear about the fact that my wife, Jolene, who's not here tonight, I'll rejoin her in New York tomorrow, I have absolutely no chance of the success I've enjoyed in my career apart from my wife, who has been that helper, that supporter, and made tremendous sacrifices to do so. So as a general rule of thumb, I can speak just biographically that I imagine there's some men that could become successful professionally without a supportive wife, but I'm not one of them. I couldn't have done it. And so therefore, having a support system in the marriage strikes me as being very, very important. Now, that was really true from the earliest days of our marriage all the way through the childbearing years. And we were in a position, we were blessed for her to be a stay-at-home mom, and the hat she was wearing was very focused on the kids and being that supporter to me. And then as our kids got older and into a different stage, my wife actually works in our business. She's literally a day-to-day person in the company. So she's not only supporting me in the work as my spouse, but she's involved in the business, and we together kind of can take ownership over our vision and love of this company. And that's just been a really unique and tremendous aspect of our company and my own marriage. That's not always going to be the case for every family, but I think a lot of times there is room for husbands, wives to work together, not merely with their own family division of labor and support system, but also in the context of a business itself. But, you know, if a husband's a lawyer and a wife is not, she probably shouldn't go to court and make an argument, you know, or go depose a witness. There's still a sensitive division of labor there. So there are so many different ways in which this could go, but I don't think any of them work if you don't start with the basic foundation of that support system. And having that adequate division of labor, that communication. You know, I defend people that work too much at times, but I equally recognize that there has to be a moment where you say, no, I do have to leave the office right now to be at the kids' soccer game or be at this particular event. Or, you know, when my wife got pneumonia once, was hospitalized, I had to make sure there were people there to visit her. I'm just kidding. I went to the hospital. I mean, I brought the laptop, but I was there. So yeah, there is obviously a significant real-life practicality to how these things get administered. The thing, I'm kind of off subject now from your question, but I go into all this stuff in the book at great length because part of my problem is with the narrative. I'm not against a guy leaving the office to go to his kid's soccer game. I'm against the idea that that's the problem we have in our society today. That there's just too many people missing their kids' soccer games. I think there's too many people missing that extra time in the office. I think that as just the weightier matters of the law goes, so to speak, we're struggling more with the latter than the former. And the greatest proof of it is Hollywood. Movie after movie after movie comes out where some person left the town they were from and went away for this corporate job and got lost in the careerism and the ambition, but then they come back and now they found that ex-girlfriend, or they remembered walking through their old high school, or mom and dad remembered what it was like, and they now feel bad and they say, you know what, I'm a changed person. I'm no longer going to be driven by this work stuff. I've remembered what's important in life, some old nostalgia or relationship or family dynamic or what have you. And it is ad nauseum, as if there are not millions of people that have failed to catch on to the grown-up responsibilities, challenges, and aspirations of life. That we have this systemic problem of people working too hard and forgetting about their high school girlfriend. It's just an absurd movie narrative, and the Hallmark Channel has managed to make a nice business model out of it. So I forgot the question now, but I hope, did I answer your question? Well, no, I mean, I wanted to give you a good answer, and I think it's probably on the minds of others as well. So if there was a different lane you were going with the question, don't assume the problem is yours. Maybe I didn't do a good job. So. Oh.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the question is about maybe seeing if there's any way to, this divide that we have between the pre-industrial age and the post, where
Right.
families don't work together anymore. Can that be revived in any way, or should it be?
Well, I don't believe it should be necessarily, which is different than saying it shouldn't be. I would say it's very contextual. And so, again, there are still family farms. There are still family home businesses. Is room where it organically and spontaneously and naturally lends itself to the input of the children and so forth. But of course, back to the example of a lawyer going in the office, incorporating the children into the legal practice is less practical. So I think it has to be very contextual. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I would be opposed to aspiring for it for no other reason than a romantic nostalgia. I don't think that we should say that there was something inherently superior about something that was really a byproduct of a cultural context in the late 19th century. Child labor laws did come to be for a reason. It was not a good thing to have 10-year-olds in the coal mines, okay? And yet, I think you can accomplish the same thing today, even when the business itself or the professional endeavor of the family does not lend itself to the kids being more directly involved like it would have in a pre-industrial revolution society. The family farm it's sort of a inherent reality that the kids were part of the farming activity. But the analogy I use, and by the way, I got to admit, I stole this from Malcolm Gladwell, but it was so biographically real to me when I read it that I teared up thinking about my late father. My dad died 28 years ago yesterday, and I pretty much spent my entire childhood. He did not ask me to go do exegesis with him when I was 6 years old. But I did wake up every day and see him in his study working. And it's probably one of the fondest memories I have of childhood. My kids have not been asked to help design a client portfolio, but they have come to the office with me on Saturdays countless times. They have seen me up early every morning of my life working. I think that the kids have still been able to participate in the family business in a different context than pre-industrial revolution. So all that to say, I'm all for it in different contexts, but in many contexts it wouldn't be suitable or reasonable. And I don't see either of those things as a problem. But I think you have to let each situation unfold.
Well, all right, Ray. All right, Ray, you can have. We got this dilemma. I'd love to have questions the rest of the night. We did promise David he could leave at 9 o'clock. We can't promise you can leave before 9, but 9 o'clock you may leave. And so we also want a fellowship. And so, Ray, this better be a good question. Thank you.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to pastors, to be productive, to be models of what you're advocating? And then how ought we to teach this better to our people and model it ourselves?
So the question is about being productive rather than just working, and it's asked about a pastor without a name, I guess. You're not putting a name on that one. But it could be for other professions as well, I suppose. So.
I think that one of the challenges in writing the book and in answering your question is that I feel that there's different categories of the targets of my criticism here. We live in a time where there's a very fragmented evangelical church in America, and I grew up in the Reformed world, and the idea of a mega church was one that had 250 people. And now in Southern California, which is in Orange County, California in particular, which is south of LA and north of San Diego, it surprises people to hear that Orange County is the mega church capital of the country, that we have no less than 5 churches that would be considered mega churches. And that's become a big model for how church is done throughout much of evangelical America. So there's a certain problem I have that I want addressed with the pastorate at a smaller, broadly evangelical church that's different than the criticism and counsel I have at a Reformed church, that's different than the counsel and criticism I have at a mega church. And all of these fall under the heading, I guess, of Protestantism, but they're really very different ecclesiastical circumstances and context. And what I think is the lacking issue is different church by church. And so there are a lot of pastors at pretty big, successful churches, evangelical, maybe not super distinctive theologically, where I would say that the pastor has a really big problem with work ethic, and that pastor works all the time. But they're working on something different than shepherding their congregation. And that, to me, and I don't think that that's necessarily a big problem with a lot of the smaller churches I refer to, or a lot of the Reformed churches I refer to. But broadly, across the evangelical landscape of America, I do think that pastors and people in their normal, non-ecclesiastical professions, there are lawyers who work too hard at things that are not advancing their lawyering. But I think that it's become much more systemic for pastors, that there is too much work going on in a number of different categories that is outside the work of actually shepherding the congregation. And so to me, because I believe that to be the primary call of the pastor, faithfully minister the word and be a shepherd to the sheep, I think that's where they need to work hard. And if at the end of the week they say, I'm drained, I worked really hard this week, but most of that work was in some form of a, forgive me, vanity project, advancing a platform, trying to become more famous, board meetings, visionary meetings, hiring consultants, I can go on and on. I don't think these things apply to the world that I grew up in, or a lot of various small and faithful churches, but I think they're completely systemic of evangelical America. And so it's just a different answer than I would give to what might be another situation. We joked earlier about someone, reading too much theology. I don't have any problem with pastors studying more, reading more, writing more. But I think at the end of the day, it's a profession that lends itself to a lot of autonomy. And for reasons that I don't know the answer to, something happened over the last 30 years where the expectation of weekly Sunday preaching has gone way downhill. And so I've struggled to make sure I'm not doing this, hey, my dad didn't get it that easy, how come? But I think that the average minister of an evangelical church of over 400 people in the United States, that's a lot of churches, I would be shocked if they preach 30 times a year. Half would be about the over-under line, with a lot of people in the under. And so for someone who grew up with a pastor who preached 51 times a week, and even on those vacation weeks was out at someone else's church preaching, somewhere, it's just as mystifying to me. So I don't want to carry my own, resentments about the challenges my dad had into an expectation that I make normative about today. But I think pastors should be preaching more, and I think they should be shepherding more. And if they're working hard but not at those things, I would suggest that there may be an issue to address. Was that helpful?
Yeah.
I hope your friend takes it to heart.
And we should really wrap up.
Yeah.
So there's coffee and other snacks on the tables right behind you now. And as Pastor Lee comes forward to close us in prayer, let's thank David for coming again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Let's close in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we come to Thee at the close of this presentation, thankful for the opportunity to have hosted it, thankful for our speaker, thankful for the questions asked and the answers given. We pray, Lord, that all that we have done tonight might truly be edifying to us and help us to grow as Christians and grow in our witness of the Lord Jesus Christ in our work life. We pray, Lord, that as we partake of refreshments, that Thou would bless the food and the fellowship unto us, and we pray that our speaker might be blessed with good travels to his next destination. Hear us in Thy love and mercy, and forgive us of our sins. For Jesus' sake, amen.
God bless you all.